Welcome back to A Legal Studies Teacher Reads the News. We're going to look at crime today, and this I found to be quite an interesting article back on June 28. It's by Angus Thompson and Pallavi Singhal. Revealed, the suburb-by-suburb targets New South Wales Police use to reach crime detection goals. A New South Wales Police spokesman said the targets had been renamed Community Safety Indicators in March. Let's have a look. Police have set a goal to detect almost 300,000 crimes across New South Wales this year and are using area-specific targets to drive results, which has raised concerns from lawyers and criminologists about officers pursuing the usual suspects and low-hanging fruit. Okay, to start off with, what's going on here? Area-specific targets, basically what it's saying is it's breaking down different areas and saying we're going to have X number of crimes or kind of looking for crimes in this area and less in another area. And so that's what they mean by area specific. We're going to break it down into different areas, and that's going to change depending on what's going on. And usual suspects and low-hanging fruit, the worry is that if you set a target, people will reach it. And they'll usually reach it in the easiest way possible. That's what that's talking about. The targets obtained by the Sun Herald under Freedom of Information laws show police aim to carry out almost 18,000 search warrants this year, with quotas in the Broken Hill and Kings Cross area commands significantly higher than on Sydney's North Shore. Quotas have also increased by more than 5% over the past 4 years, despite the actual number of crimes detected falling by 5% over the same period. Police say the targets are based on a 3-year average of actual incidents. So a quota, you're saying the police are going to meet X number of search warrants. And as I said, it's this issue of, well, hang on a second. If you've got a quota, the police are going to feel like they need to meet it. And that becomes a problematic issue for quite a few people. The proactive approach to policing sets targets for the number of detections in 14 categories of crime, including theft, robbery, sexual assault, drug detection, malicious damage, and fraud. In total, across all categories, excluding personal search, move-on orders, and injury and fatal crash targets, Kings Cross has the highest target for 2020 at 106 detections per 1,000 people living in the area, more than double the New South Wales average of 49 detections per 1,000 people. The smallest targets are for Quakers Hill and Kurungai at 19 detections per 1,000 people, and Ryde and Camden at 20 each. So that's what I was talking about with these different, and the police would simply say, we're being intelligent here. We're showing that these are the areas where more crime happens, so they're going to have the highest targets. The New South Wales police spokesperson said the target had been renamed Community Safety Indicators in March, as the new wording better described the reason behind the benchmarks, adding there was a direct correlation between policing and the reduction of crime. Let's stop there and have a look at our syllabus and have a think about what's happening here. What's going on? Well, for certain, we're looking at things like the effectiveness of legal and non-legal measures in achieving justice. So this is a legal measure. The police who represent society and who are policing crime, they are undertaking a measure to try and achieve justice by finding criminal activity and using these quotas to kind of reduce it. That's what the spokesperson said here. If we're thinking through here, we've had a couple of mentions of different types of crime there that she mentioned. Also, we've got here crime prevention, situational. This is most certainly an example of situational crime prevention. There's a direct correlation, she says, between policing and the reduction of crime. I keep saying she. I'm not 100% sure if it's a she or not. That's okay. By monitoring performance across a range of key policing areas, commanders are able to ensure their police are providing the best possible service and safest community standards to the citizens of New South Wales, the spokesperson said. Punitive action is not taken if targets are not met. So there is a key term here in this question here of what's going to happen. If targets are set, but then maybe an area, something happens, I don't know, maybe a global pandemic happens, and the targets are going to be nowhere near the levels they normally are, well, the spokesperson has tried to reassure the community and say police aren't going to go out and try and find, someone to search. Punitive action, so punishing action's not going to be taken if they're met. But, okay, so note that, we've heard from the spokesperson, and because this is a newspaper report, you'll constantly hear from both sides. But criminologists and lawyers warn the use of quotas could pressure police into pursuing easy targets and encourage strategies contrary to community interests, such as undue focus on Indigenous Australians and other marginalised groups. Okay, so we're going to hear about this in greater detail here, but straight away I start thinking about the theme and the challenge here of the extent to which the law balances the rights of victims, offenders, and society. Here's this question. The police claim that they are protecting society. However, at the same time, you've got this question of, well, is that out of balance with the actual rights of offenders or non-offenders who are going to be targeted here? They believe undue focus by Indigenous Australians and other marginalised groups. So that's the question that I'd be thinking here if we're thinking about that. Professor Talia Anthony from the University of Technology, Sydney Law School said increasing detection did not necessarily reduce crime. Its only effect is to validate the statistic. It doesn't enhance community safety. Well, we've got two opposing ideas in this article, haven't we? The police spokesperson saying there's a direct correlation between policing and a reduction of crime. And then you've got Professor Talia Anthony from UTS Law School saying it only validates statistics, it doesn't enhance community safety. Okay, so they're not exactly the opposite of sides of a coin, but they're very close. And this is a question here of effectiveness of legal measures in achieving justice. I would think probably a question of the extent to which the law reflects moral and ethical standards as well. This question of, well, what should police be doing? And police working harder, is that actually making us safer? Is that the role the police should have? Or should they simply be ensuring safety and not worrying about these quotas? Let's continue to see what Professor Anthony says. Professor Anthony said the tactics were also harmful to Indigenous Australians who are already subject to racial profiling. So there's a topic that we could talk about at length. The idea that police, when they are conducting searches, when they're looking for criminals, when they are conducting an investigation process down here, the criminal investigation process, police have certain powers when they are investigating crime, gathering evidence, search and seizure, use of warrants, all of that. This question, well, is there racial profiling? In other words, does the race of the person they are looking at actually affect their decision in searching, in seizing property, etc., etc.? So continuing on. Police are applying a set of values and stereotypes that they are not even aware of. And so when you have targets, when you have targets, the reliance on those stereotypes becomes more acute in the furtherance of meeting those targets. Okay, so Professor Anthony here is claiming, she's saying, look, I'm not necessarily saying this is an intentional thing here, that the racial profiling is on purpose, but she is claiming that the unintentional targeting of the audience of these stereotypes becomes worse when we add these quotas because they're trying to meet the target. The data shows that the target for warrants executed or finalised this year is more than 17,700 statewide, with quotas for some areas set at 4 times the average rate of 3.2 per 1,000 people. The target for the Barrier Police Station in Broken Hill is set at 264 in 2020, a rate of nearly 13 warrants per 1,000 people. King's Cross has a target of 239 or 12 per 1,000, and South Sydney has a target of 559 or 8 per 1,000. Okay, so you're noting the difference there. Got 3.2 as a state average, and then you've got 13 for some areas, 12 for others, 8 for others. At the other end of the spectrum, the North Shore Area Command has a target of 69 warrants at a rate of 0.3 per 1,000 people. So that's showing you this difference there. Between Broken Hill, 13, and North Shore 0.3. So there's a big difference there in the targets. There are also targets for apprehended violence order breaches leading to legal action and for successful prosecutions from issuing court attendance notices. The statewide target for drug detection supply, which has grown the most, increased 86% to 6,462 this year. Actual rates of drug supply detection have grown by 18% over the same period to 7,338 offences. Okay, so this is looking at the target, and it's kind of breaking down a couple of the changes and the increases in how much they're actually seeking to stamp out this action. The highest proportional targets for drug detection this year in King's Cross, 13.2 per thousand, Surrey Hills, 7.9, and South Sydney, 5.3. Targets for drug detection have increased more than targets for any other category in a number of areas, including Mount Druitt, where the targets more than doubled. Actual rates of drug supply detection in Mount Druitt increased 116% to 143. Professor Murray Lee, director of the Sydney Institute of Criminology, so someone who knows what they're talking about at the University of Sydney, said focusing on the detection of certain crimes, such as drug supply, could push the offence rates higher over time and risk it becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's that concept. You might say, we set a target, we make the target higher to try and stamp out crime and look like we're fighting crime well. And what's actually going to happen is you're going to increase the rates of detection and it's going to become this self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, we're doing better because we've got more drug detection arrests. He quotes, "You may well see police going for the low-hanging fruit, whether that's over-policing in particular areas to meet those targets, so the police doing too much work and being too proactive, going after the usual suspects," Professor Lee said. The target for robbery in Kurungai has fallen 40% since 2016 to 20 this year, while actual incidents have been increasing in that area, tripling from 10 to 30 from 2016 to last year. Okay, so there's just an example where the targets seem to be out of sync. That's what that's saying. Robberies fallen 40%, however, robberies are up 300%, 10 to 30. Okay, so how could we use this article? So we've got a whole bunch of areas of the crime syllabus that this fits into. The role of discretion in the criminal justice system. So this concept of when the police are investigating crime here, the criminal investigation process, the police powers they've got to investigate it, gather evidence, etc., etc. So there's this question of, well, are quotas actually having a negative impact overall based on a kind of a bias of what's happened in the past? We've also got this question of, therefore, the extent to which the law reflects moral and ethical standards. Should we actually have quotas? Is that making the community safer? Do we want police thinking about, oh, we should have X number of arrests this year or X number of searches and seizures this year? Or should they simply be conducting patrols and reacting? So it's this question of proactive versus reactive. And at that point of view, you got the question of the law balancing the rights of victims, offenders, and society. So the idea of keeping society safe by having quotas and the New South Wales police spokesperson saying, yeah, there's this direct correlation between policing and the reduction of crime, and just in 2 paragraphs later saying, well, no, that validates statistics. It doesn't actually enhance community safety. So there's that question of balance there for this question here of what do the police do? Now, in the past, when I've been doing this, I've been chucking up, let's look at how it's like to the syllabus. I thought what I'd actually might do is grab a question or two and have a look at how you might actually incorporate this article into a question. So here's a question. Discuss the use of discretion in achieving justice in the criminal justice system. So if I was answering this question, discuss the use of discretion, I would probably talk some length in sentencing and punishment and the question of discretion of judges in order to choose what sentence they're going to bring down, and this question of mandatory minimums. Most certainly I would talk about that. You also talk about, if you wanted, within the criminal trial process, the idea of Director of Public Prosecutions and Public Defenders, and sorry, not that, pleas and charge negotiation. So it's a question of whether whether the Director of Public Prosecutions can choose to allow certain crimes to have 25% reduction in penalty. Are we going to go after this person, not after that person? You could talk about that too. For this, I would talk about using this article, this question of police powers and investigating crime, and bring up this article. So discuss the use of discretion with police in investigating crime, and quotas, whether quotas actually take away from police discretion. So you'd bring up this concept that Professor Talia Anthony is talking about, where she talks about police are applying a set of values and stereotypes they're not even aware of. And so when you have targets, the reliance on those stereotypes becomes more acute in the furtherance of meeting those targets. Use of discretion. So the police are choosing who they're going after, and we could quote Professor Talia Anthony here to talk about that. We've got a bunch of statistics you could talk about when it comes to the use of discretion, and say, well, you've got certain targets that are based on the past, and does that actually mean that police are going to be walking into and around that area with preconceived ideas about what needs to happen when they're policing? We could also quote here, Professor Lee is talking about this idea of focusing on the detection of certain crimes could push the offence rate higher over time and risk it becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the use of discretion in achieving justice, so you might not talk simply about policing there, you might actually talk about decisions that are made about how the policing happens, because the police don't choose these quotas, obviously. All right, the police have, so the police themselves haven't. All right, so you might talk about the upper echelons of the organisation in choosing to have these quotas and how these quotas are set up. So that's something you could also talk about, and then quote Professor Lee if you wanted, and talk about this idea that Kurungai, which had one of the lowest, if you remember, they've got falling 20% for robberies, when in fact they've increased from 10 to 30, tripling. All right, so hopefully that helps. That's an idea. That's for 2018. Let's have a look at 2016. The criminal justice system must treat young offenders differently in order to achieve justice. To what extent is this statement true? So you could talk about areas where young people are more likely to be. So you could talk about, for example, the over-policing and the incarceration rates, the high incarceration rates when it comes to areas of Indigenous areas. So you've got, there was this discussion here of Barrier in Broken Hill, a rate of nearly 13 people, warrants per 1,000 people. King's Cross, an area where young people go, and we have a lot of alcohol issues with alcoholic violence, etc., etc., etc. So you could talk about that as well, and about these, how not just you have undue influence here, when we're talking about Professor Anthony's talking about things that don't have racial profiling here and stereotypes. So you could also talk about the concept of young people falling into those stereotypes. 2014, this would be an interesting one. So we've got the Honourable Robert Debus, Attorney General. Over time, this Parliament, as a representative of the community and the courts, have given police certain powers required to effectively fulfil their role in law enforcement. In return for these powers, however, police are required to exercise their power responsibly, particularly when those powers affect the civil liberties of members of the community whom the police serve. To what extent does the criminal investigation process balance the rights of victims, suspects, and society? So there's a lovely little quote that you can have a think about, and about a whole bunch of this stuff here. So as Professor Talia Anthony is talking about, stereotypes when it comes to becoming more acute under quotas, the idea of quotas actually having an effect, so the different areas, and you've got 3.2 per 1,000 people statewide, and then you've got 4 times that in King's Cross and in Broken Hill, okay, and double it in South Sydney, or nearly triple it. So you could talk about that as well. And the self-fulfilling prophecy would also fit into this quite well at the same time. This idea that the police have certain powers, they need to look after people, and yet we need to balance out the rights of society. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully that helps in an area for crime. I'm going to have a look at a few more crime things in future. So keep listening in, and hopefully this is helping you out for those people studying for their HSC for legal studies.